All right, recording has started. So before we get going, a little bit of background about our team. InnoVelocity is a specialist consultancy and system integrator specializing in digital process automation technologies. We started off way back in 2007 with Intalio, and we've since grown our practice with Axe and Ivy, Bizaji, K2, Nintex, and the topic we're discussing here today, Camunda. And above and beyond the technical services, we also have the full suite of services to deliver a complete solution, everything from process modeling, analysis and improvement through to automation with RPA and reporting, working with a bunch of different companies in all sizes and a variety of different verticals. As for me, I'm the company and the Meetup group founder. But I won't be doing much more talking today. I'd like to hand over to our presenters, Aaron and Sam, to kick off the rest of the introductions.
Thank you, Neil. My name is Aaron Williamson. I'm a lead consultant with InnoVelocity. I've been with the company for almost 5 years now and have been practicing the project management, program management, and overall implementation for projects for 20 years and recently in the process automation space with InnoVelocity, and have worked extensively with Sam on several projects in several industries. So Sam, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Aaron. Hey guys, my name is Sam Weinstock. I've been with InnoVelocity for about 4 years now, doing BPM consulting, and my background is mechanical engineering, and then kind of self-taught software development from there. Pretty much everything outside college has been software development.
Okay, see my mug there. And we're also, it would be nice to just have a quick round of introductions for the folks that are on the call today. Could we just go down the list here and maybe start with, let's see, who else do we have here?
Adam, Bastian, David.
Yeah, why don't we start with Bastian?
Yeah, hi, my name is Bastian. I've been in the digital practice for years. I ran business online banking for Bank of the West for 5 and worked with Wells Fargo previous to that doing digital banking. Worked my career towards doing BPM for Bizaji as a customer success director, and I'm now pursuing BPM consulting work as well. So that's my background.
Thanks, Bastian. Maybe David next.
I don't know how many Davids there are on the call, but my name is David Zinkowski. I'm an employee with InnoVelocity. Been doing consulting work with InnoVelocity now for like 6 years, primarily development of Bizaji, but diversifying into other softwares as well.
Thanks, David. And is it Matthijs? Sorry if I'm...
Hi, this is Matthijs. It's a Dutch name. We can actually say like Matthew. I'm from Amsterdam. I saw this topic and it fits my schedule so well. I thought I will just join and see well, what's it about. I work for a digital agency company in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. And I'm a business consultant in the BPM domain. So I already did some installations for Camunda myself, but I really like to hear, well, what your experience is about. So thank you.
Fantastic, welcome. And how about the other Dave, Parlick?
Hey, yeah. I'm Dave Parolick. I'm a BPM consultant as well, and we're looking to implement Bizaji at a customer here coming up in next year. So thanks for the heads up, Aaron, and thanks for the presentation, Sam. Looking forward to it.
Yeah,
excellent. And then we also have Ryan.
Hello, yes, my name is Ryan Faust, and I'm a technical consultant and also post-sales engineer for Camunda. And so I'm here just for, moral support, and also so that I can learn a bit about the project and, how our various partners and customers and community are using Camunda out in the wild, so to speak. So I'll just be listening in, and I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to join everyone.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ryan. And then Pramod.
Hey everyone, Pramod here. I'm based out of Toronto. I'm a solution architect, mostly in integration space. I previously have BPM experience when I was working on Software AG's BPM tool. Camunda is something new that I'm trying to see how it can help my clients to engage in the BPM space.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Armina? Arum, I'm probably just not getting the name right. Armin. Maybe they're on mute. And Raghu has left, and then we have one left here. Adam. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, Adam?
You put it in the chat. You might be having audio issues. That is the developer engineer. Been using BPM and standard for 2 years.
Okay. All right. Is there anyone else that's on the call that hasn't introduced themselves?
Looks like we got a Siva joined.
Hey, am I audible?
Hi, Siva.
Hi. Yeah. I'm working as a developer for the past 1 year. So I'm using community version.
Okay.
Awesome.
Mostly I use Camunda to automate the backend activities, and yeah.
Excellent. Welcome. Well, it looks like we have quite a range of folks here today, and might as well get started here. We have basically the objective of this overview is to provide an example of Camunda implementation and associated architecture, and the discussion will be a very specific example that Sam has been working on for a while. Sam, you want to go to the next slide? And as you may or may not know, Camunda is an extremely flexible developer framework for BPM applications. And this webinar is, we're going to demonstrate one way to implement the Camunda project, but obviously there's many different ways of doing this. And that's largely due to Camunda's flexible and scalable architecture. It really has an optimized, it's optimized for systems integration for cloud or on-prem, very customizable UI interface, customizable UI with several options, including Angular and React. And we're going to see an Angular example in Sam's presentation today. And it has extensive source control tools for logging, history, error reporting, diagnostics, and you'll get a flavor of that when Sam goes through his example. Keep in mind that with this example, that we're not doing an end-to-end demonstration of how to implement this particular process from nuts to bolts. We're trying to demonstrate some key parts that Sam used in this architecture, and is going to talk about some of the details of what tools he chose, why he chose them, and we expect a great deal of variety of possible answers of how someone else might implement it. So if there's questions or there's additional conversation that people want to have about a particular part, please feel free during the presentation to speak up and chip in, because that's what we're all really here for, is to try to learn from each other and get those creative juices flowing. So without further ado, let's go over to Sam. And Sam, why don't you show us what you've got and what tools you're using for the implementation?
Thanks, Aaron. Will do. Yeah, and feel free to, you don't have to have your cameras on if you want to stop sharing for bandwidth or whatever. With a lot of cameras, it can get a little heavy as far as network goes. So yeah, let's start off with kind of the tools that I chose, why I chose them. The first and foremost, obviously, is Camunda, and why I chose Camunda is clear. It's a very powerful BPMN, DMN, and CMMN engine. About in May of this year, I did a training for the microservices training along with Raghu, who was on here for a minute, and then it looked like he bounced off. But since that training, I've been going through different ways of architecting Camunda applications. The first one that I did, and I'll show that here in just a minute as well, was more of a embedded application, embedded architecture. This is more of a standalone type architecture. But so the first thing that we chose here was Camunda for its process modeling. I also wanted things to be to utilize Docker containers for their developer friendliness, as well as for the ability, their strengths that they have, which I'll talk about also in a subsequent slide. We chose Angular along with TypeScript so that we could have a highly dynamic and customizable UI, and then TypeScript so that we could harness object-oriented programming language. That's stuff that I'm more familiar with as far as .NET goes. And then we chose, I wanted something to be able to handle reverse proxy. So when I'm using Docker as a containerized solution, I've got a lot of things on localhost or on the same server in a sense, utilizing different ports. So I needed to solve that solution, and NGINX was the obvious choice in that for its open source, extremely good performance, well documented, and they got bought out by F5 at some point while I was doing this, or maybe before that. But that was a great choice for the overall web server. We are utilizing Keycloak for its user and permissions management. So Keycloak is kind of similar to Okta in the sense that it can handle users from multiple different directories, whether they're coming from a cloud source or whether they're coming from Active Directory or wherever they might be. You can also manage them directly in Keycloak, which is what I've done here that you'll be seeing. And then I wanted to utilize the stuff that I learned in training in microservices. So I put together a C#.NET core project that's utilizing Hangfire for its job management, and that is in its own container so that it can handle any sort of job that I would need to throw at it, whether it's a long withstanding job or a quick job like sending an email, which is what I'll show you. And then I chose MySQL for databases since it's an open source version of SQL, and I'm more familiar with SQL than Oracle. Any questions on any of these tools, or are you guys familiar with these tools? No? All right, cool. We will continue on. So the next slide here talks a little bit about the standalone architecture that I kind of envision in my head. I think about it this way in the sense because as a user, you come into a URL and the first thing that you see is, kind of Keycloak and Angular. From that point of view, it's a little bit misleading because everything really is behind NGINX. So NGINX is controlling the load to every single one of the containers. Each one of these orange boxes is its own container. And then I wanted to also show it this way because down at the bottom underneath NGINX, we can see we've got multiple microservices, or multiple Camunda engines, multiple MySQL databases. And the reason I show them like that is because using NGINX and containers, it is relatively simple to be able to spin up a new container. So say you have a lot of throughput for emails, or you have a lot of throughput for the process engine itself, you could easily spin up another container and have NGINX load balance between those containers to kind of handle all the throughput that you have going on. So the ability to scale with NGINX is very powerful. All right, so the next thing that I wanted to do is kind of just jump right into kind of our working example, and we can go a little bit more in detail into each one of the pieces and kind of how they're working together and why we did what we did. So like I was saying a little bit earlier, as far as Camunda goes, it's got multiple different architectures. And the first one that I did was an embedded process engine, which basically you have your process engine and your Java application all in one Java project. And for that, I was using Eclipse as my IDE. I was using HTML forms and kind of set it up that way because for me that was a more simplistic approach. If all you want to do is utilize Camunda, use its task list and that sort of thing. So that was the first iteration. I'm happy to talk about that one more or show it. I also have that running if we get to a point that we want to compare and contrast. So then I kind of went from that embedded process engine to, in my sense, a way more complex version, which is the standalone, remote process engine server is the way that I kind of look at it. So all these different pieces are their own individual containers, and they're communicating within their own networks, and they're accessing Camunda via its REST services. And Camunda has an extremely extensive REST service engine. So you can do everything remotely, which is extremely powerful. Yeah, any questions on Camunda or its architecture, different architecture types? No? Okay, cool. The next thing that I wanted to cover while we're getting in here is Docker itself and kind of how that's set up. So in this architecture that we set up, we've got a total of 9 containers currently running. I have NGINX in its own container. I have my microservices engine running in its own container, the web app, which is Angular and TypeScript in its own container, and then Camunda BPM, which is the engine, also running in its container, and then Keycloak and a few MySQL databases. So Keycloak has its own database, Camunda communicates and writes to its own database, Hangfire in the microservices engine writes to its own database, and then I have this data SQL, which the microservices can write to. I was envisioning that to be kind of like your centralized hub for reporting, where it could take information from all the different pieces, put it into a database, and if you wanted to, you could connect something like Tableau or Power BI or something to that and report directly off that. If you guys aren't, I don't know how familiar you are with Docker, one of the giant strengths of Docker from a developer point of view is its ability to separate out dependencies. If you've ever worked with a larger scale .NET project or Java project or anything, once you start to pull in libraries from different resources, you'll inevitably run into a situation where those libraries are accessing the same dependency and probably on different versions. And when you start to build a project like that, you have to resolve all those issues. With Docker, you get around a lot of that because each one of its containers relies on its own set of dependencies, and they're not shared between the two. It also makes it really nice for another developer to come in and start working with your container or setting up, continuing development or adding on to it, for example. So all they have to do is, install Docker and download your container and pull your container and run it, and they can kind of get going really quickly. Some other benefits of Docker are its ability to have private networks between the containers. So, depending on which containers need to communicate with each other, you don't have to open up ports to the public. You can have two, specific containers have the ability to communicate directly with each other. And then for security purposes, as far as usernames and passwords and all that stuff for configuration, Docker supports what they call secrets, and secrets allow you to put all that sensitive information into a text file. That text file then gets copied directly onto the container itself, where it reads the information directly on that container. So you're not broadcasting anything. It's a physical file directly on a container. That container is, then either open to ports or not, depending on how you configure it. And then, it allows for, in my eyes, a pretty good security as far as those pieces go. And then, another benefit as far as development goes, so all these containers are running on Linux operating systems. They're all very efficient. They're not using up a lot of bandwidth, although, this is a development environment. There's not a lot of throughput going through it, but I currently have all 9 of these containers running on 8 gigs of RAM, and all the stuff that I've done to it, I haven't run into a situation where I had to throw more at it, which is nice. And then, other things that you can kind of configure is you can either allow or disallow communication directly to some of these containers. So Dave, you asked a question, did I publish my Docker machines to a cloud by chance? So I am using Docker Hub as far as pushing and pulling. So if I was to work with other developers, we'd be using the same image. Is that what you're asking? Or are you asking if I'm running the project from the cloud?
Yeah, no, I was more interested in like pushing it out to AWS, for example. I've heard that's possible, I think. I was just curious if you had any experience.
I don't currently. I have to imagine it's so possible. Yeah, and more along the lines of like deployments and whatnot too. I know the ability to kind of run all these through like an Azure pipeline or whatnot to get it all deployed is possible.
Yeah, for sure. That seems like the ideal for me. Just, do everything in Docker and then you just push it out to like Azure. Like that would be really cool. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. And that actually kind of ties in. I haven't, so Pramrod, you asked the question, have I considered Kubernetes? I personally chose Docker just for the reason that I'd used it in the past. For my next implementation or demo, I would probably switch it up to Kubernetes just to learn something new. Docker recently changed some things where there's only a certain number of polls for free accounts per like day or month, which I wasn't too happy about. But I haven't used it, but it's definitely another option. I think everything that I've done with Docker, you can also do with Kubernetes. And then Dave, kind of back to your point. Oh, Sivu, you also had a question. Is Camunda running on Tomcat and Docker? So this is actually a Spring Boot implementation of Camunda, which is, I'm trying to think if it's Wildfire Tomcat. I'm not the strongest when it comes to Java stuff, which is why I chose to do .NET for microservices and everything else. But yeah, the implementation of Camunda, or the container that I started with, is a Spring Boot container for Camunda, and then modified it to let it, add the Keycloak plugin, and then also adjust it so that it can use MySQL. So the other pieces that I kind of want to touch on while I'm in here is VS Code. So the IDE that I'm using currently is VS Code. And the reason that I chose this IDE, as you can see, is that I can access every part of this project seamlessly. So not only can I connect with my SQL databases and look at everything that's going on there, or look at data live. This is why I have these ports open with the Docker containers so that I can map them and use them, look at them directly. You can also connect directly to each one of the containers and look at any logs that are going on as far as jobs go, or you can connect directly to them, attach a shell, and navigate the Linux operating system inside of there, so you can see if files are where they should be or if anything else. Your ability to utilize everything all in one place is extremely powerful. The Spring Boot, the Maven project itself is in here. All of my other individual projects are contained in here. So my microservices, which are running, .NET Core, along with the entire Angular application itself. So everything is very easy to get to and access. The next aspect that I kind of wanted to cover was Keycloak. So, when you come to the app itself, the first thing that you're brought to is a login, and this login itself is managed by Keycloak. I can also connect directly to my Keycloak container. And in Keycloak, you have the ability, like I was saying a little bit earlier, to communicate with identity providers from all over. So whether it's Microsoft, whether it's Google, Facebook, wherever you have your users, you can integrate everything into Keycloak. You can then set up properties for those users in which you can map different settings or properties that you can then globally use across your Angular application or your microservices or Camunda. And then the users that you set up here are the users that you're using to authenticate. So you can set it up a single sign-on. In this case, I just have it set up with usernames and password. And in this case, I'm adding my users manually, but one of the huge benefits of it is that you can have users in a whole bunch of different places and kind of unify them so that your system can communicate with one provider. Yeah, so that, and one thing I want to point out here is my URL. So at the moment, I'm looking at SamBio, which is this local computer, port 8070/auth. And what's doing all this routing is NGINX. So that's taking me to Keycloak, the initial authentication of the application takes me to Keycloak. And then depending on the URL, NGINX is going to do all the routing for that. And it's really awesome as far as the setup of NGINX. So you can set it up to route to any URL. So if we look at the configuration of NGINX, we can see, yeah, thanks Adam for answering that question. Keycloak is free. So everything that I've used here so far is all open source and free. Most of them do have paid options, which I think is important when you're looking for an open source, just for the sense of not having it disappear on you one day if you're using it. So if they do have a paid income coming from paid avenues, then they tend to stick around a lot longer. So in this case, our NGINX configuration, I've got it listening on port 8070 on server SamBio. And then depending on what my endpoint is, that's how it determines which container it's going to talk to. So whether it's going to Keycloak, whether it's going to Camunda web app, which is the Angular front end, or whether it's going to the Camunda engine itself, which is where all of the web services and whatnot go through. And then here's the reverse proxy piece of it. So if you guys have ever developed with containers or anything like that, you'll know you'll have inevitably hit a CORS error somewhere. And this is one of the ways of solving that issue without just enabling CORS globally. And then microservices, so I'll show a little bit more of the microservices here in a second too, as well as, and what that's doing in the background. But NGINX controls all that configuration and how it gets routed. And then if you wanted to load balance this, your configuration file is going to change slightly. You're going to add more containers, and instead of me pointing directly at a specific container in here, I would say, look at this, general name, and then NGINX would go to that general name in the configuration file and determine, how it needs to balance between those containers, whether it's round robin or whether it's, any one of the different types of load balancing. All right, so yeah, that's why we chose NGINX. The next piece of our kind of our architecture here that I wanted to talk about was Angular along with TypeScript. That's what's doing our actual application and the UI. And again, we chose this because it's extremely dynamic. You have the flexibility to add whatever elements you want, and then with TypeScript, you have the ability to develop the code using object-oriented programming standards. So you have inheritance, you've got interfaces, you have strongly typed variables, whereas JavaScript is by default not a very strongly typed language. When you add TypeScript on top of that, you're adding the ability to strongly type your variables, which I find beneficial, as opposed to having the compiler determine what you want it to be. I like to be very specific when I'm developing something. Another cool thing about all this, so let me just do a little bit of a kind of layout overview. This is when you would first log in, you would log into your applications. These applications themselves are processes. They were built using Camunda Modeler and then deployed to the application itself. So in this case, here's a purchase requisition process. I currently don't have any tasks. The reason I don't have any tasks in here is because every 24 hours, it closes anything that's open at the first activity here. And that's where I typically leave things on this demo project. But I can create a new purchase requisition directly through here. And then if we come back, we'll see now I do have a task created. And again, this whole UI itself was more of a proof of concept, definitely a work in progress. So there's no, it's not fine-tuned by any means. But you also have the ability to, look at all tasks in general. You could work on the task here. You could add your request items, and everything is kind of dynamically calculated. It gives you a very nice feel as far as an application goes. We also wanted to demonstrate a little bit of, the flexibility with the web services as far as being able to filter things. So there's a few items up here, a few of many. There's many different additional pieces that you could filter on as well, but you could filter on groups or applications. These groups themselves are coming directly from Keycloak. The only Keycloak group that I have currently is Camunda Admin. You can filter on claimed or unclaimed. And it started from Camunda has quite a few examples to start with, and Camunda has an Angular example that you can start with as far as a task list implementation. So that's where some of this stuff started as well. Yeah, and then we have this other process here, which I call test process. It is communicating with the microservices engine in the background. So if I create a new instance of this, then I'm just saying, who am I going to send my email to? And at that point, I have another new task, which is this validate variable values. Excellent task name, but it's when I click submit on this one, it'll actually go to the microservices engine itself, and the microservices engine will then pick that up and send the email. So in this terminal down here at the bottom, you can see like every 15 to 30 seconds or so, the .NET Core microservices engine running Hangfire. So Hangfire will go out and pick up jobs, and it'll send out this email. And as far as the emails go, I'm currently using what's called Devil Mail to catch all my emails so that they don't actually go out to anyone. Using an email catch is always advised, especially in a development environment. So in just a little bit, that'll get caught up. Mattis, good question, or Matthew. I'll answer that in just a second here. So as you can see in here, it did pick up the email, and it creates a message ID. This is all being created or done through this email controller, which is the .NET Core piece. And then what I wanted to show, which is kind of cool, if I come over here, here's the email itself, and we put in a little tracker, I guess, in the email. So if I come and I actually click on this and load it, I just sent the .NET Core engine a message saying that this email was open. So every, email company, MailChimp or whatever, they all have some sort of email tracking. But one of the biggest things that we get in BPM is that I didn't get a notification. And if you've got the ability to track the notifications as they go out, then you can obviously have a little bit more data as far as who's opening emails, how often they're opened, and things like that. Yeah, so as far as keeping the models and the information, so this is all kind of comes into Camunda's REST services themselves. When you are interfacing with Camunda and its web services, you can get all the tasks for a particular process. So the web services would return, tasks by process ID or by process name, depending on what you want to get. And then as far as keeping them in sync, for example, when the email controller goes to get its information, the first thing that it calls is fetch and lock tasks. And what that does is that says, Camunda, give me all of the tasks with this topic name. The topic name in this case is driven through Camunda Modeler. So in this case, my topic name here is send email. So I call out to the server and say, give me all jobs with topic send email that are waiting to be picked up. And then you send it a lock duration. So in this case, I say, lock it for, I think it's a minute or so, and assign it a worker ID and then do the work. So if it doesn't perform the work in the lockout time and it tries to perform it after the lockout duration is over, it'll say, you can't do this. You need to fetch and lock the task again. But that's how the tasks themselves, as far as the jobs, are kept in sync. And then as far as the process models and the information, so, you know, to deploy in this application, there's a couple pieces to it, and what you're kind of hitting on is the BPMN and the DMN files themselves. So anytime I make a modification to either the process model or the decision matrix that's behind this process model, in this case, we have a decision matrix that determines which departments approve requests depending on the amount. If I make any modifications to this, I save the files out, and then I go back to my web UI. I say new deployment, and I pull in the files that I want to deploy. And then once it tells me that that's successful, then we can go back and look at the deployment that just came in. So I'm automatically giving it a name with web app deployment because that's where it's coming from, and then the date and time. Yeah, so Ryan, that's an excellent question. I can. So currently I'm picking 5 tasks at a time. So if I was to have 5 emails lined up, then, and this is why all these have such excellent subjects and bodies. We'll just create a few of these. It'll pick up 5 and it'll send 5 emails out at a time. You could absolutely scale that as much as necessary. So if you had a bunch of throughput in emails, there's a couple different ways that you can tackle it. You can either try handling more emails at a time, or you could add another container and use NGINX to load balance it. So then you could, essentially double up what it's doing. So that picked up, the first one happened before I got to it, or before here, but then there was task count 2, and these are all async tasks. So it picked up all those emails, it sent all those emails. If I come back to Devil Mail, I now have 3 emails sitting in here. And every time I load the email, it then phones back home to the .NET controller to say this email is open, here's the message ID, and the email address that it was sent to. Yeah, thanks for all the questions, guys. I was worried that this was going to be an extremely slow presentation. Yeah, so let's kind of jump back and look at what we've got as far as our pieces. So all the topics or all of the platforms that we used, we've kind of looked at a little bit. The only one I haven't really touched on is MySQL. I'm happy to go into that if you guys want, but it's really just an SQL database with pieces of data in it. As far as Hangfire and Keycloak and whatnot, it's one of the lesser interesting pieces until you get to reporting or needing to grab more information out of the Camunda database. But so what we kind of looked at was we looked at the Angular web app, or the flow of the Angular web app itself, which reminds me, there was another thing that I wanted to show on here as well, which is the quickness of changes. So in the Angular web app, you can have a like essentially on the fly compiling. So if I come in here, this is an HTML page here for documents. Let me show you what it looks like currently. So currently, if I come here, it says, wouldn't it be nice to have some documents here if you were connected to an ECM or something? If I come over to my code and I make a couple of changes, and put, something silly in there, what's going to happen over here is this picks up that there's a change. So down here, app updating, recompiling, it's going to reload my application, my Angular application, and now it shows that change right away. So that makes it really quick to do UI development without having to recompile your entire, container, as well as the Angular code behind it. So we looked at the Angular front end, the Angular app itself. I'm happy to go into more detail on that if you guys have any questions on there. We looked at Keycloak as far as being able to manage users and being able to pull in users from wherever they may live, whilst having the ability for your Angular app or your microservices or Camunda, any one of those to pull in from those same users. Along those same lines, what I didn't show you was the ability that I can log into kind of the Camunda front end itself with the same users. So that Sam Weinstock user was the exact same one that lives here in Keycloak as far as Sam Weinstock and whatnot. I'm also using Keycloak to handle specifications as far as what users can see what. So I have this other user in here called Aaron. He has a couple different pieces where his home is applications and the main menus that he can see are applications and tasks. So if I come back over here, I'm currently logged in as Sam. I see everything on the left. If I log out as myself and I log in as Aaron, you can see right now he can't see any of those things. He can see tasks, he can see applications. And if I try to go somewhere else, I currently have it set up where it's just going to reroute you back to your home, back to applications. Dave, so not currently. I was thinking about the different ways to handle. So Dave asked a question, am I using Camunda authorization service REST API calls in my custom task list? I am not currently using that, but it is, like if I go into my Java code right now, that part of it's commented out. I was planning on, at least for this demonstration, since the Angular web app knows who's logged in, I can control the traffic that goes from Angular to Camunda. So I was going to use that knowledge to be able to filter things based on who it was. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. As far as security goes, having the authorization service REST API enabled is definitely valuable, and that's on the list of things to do as far as security hardening goes. Yeah, so that was, showing, Angular, Keycloak, NGINX, which I've loved NGINX the entire time that I've used it as far as the reverse proxy and the server aspect of it, being able to route all the traffic however you need. And then the microservices. So currently in the microservices, it's really just being used at the moment for emails and email tracking. It's writing data to a SQL database anytime it has an error for error logging and things of that nature. And then the Camunda engine itself, and being able to communicate and utilize its REST API to handle all the communications. It's extremely powerful. Yeah, at this point, I'd like to kind of open it up a little bit more to, future development. If you guys have any questions or if there's anything that you would like to see, we can implement other pieces into our POC, our demo here, and we could do a follow-up demo at some point in the future with different topics. So some things that are on our list: reporting, document storage as far as ECM goes. There's an open source ECM called Alfresco, which kind of fits in line with the other pieces that I've chosen for this demonstration. RPA is a huge hotspot, as you all know, robotics process automation to kind of take over mundane tasks or things that are simple that users are currently doing that might be taking up their time. Further into DMNs, Camunda's DMN capabilities are extreme, and I've kind of just touched the tip of the iceberg as far as the potentials of DMNs. But yeah, anything, any questions or any other topics that you guys would like to see in a future demo, we're happy to consider everything.
Would people be more interested in seeing something about reporting over, say, RPA, or are people more interested in RPA right now?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, and did you find this demo itself beneficial? You know, were the things that we covered here things that are on your radar or things that you're currently implementing?
This is Dave. Yeah, this has been really interesting for me, and kudos on your task list. It really looks nice. I think maybe the one topic that I'm pretty interested in is DMN. I just it sounds like it's a really cool concept, and I like that they've implemented the spec, but I think they charge extra for it, and so it's not like, I'm not sure if it's worth the extra amount that they charge, and even if it is, like, it seems pretty useful to be able to define something in DMN rather than custom code, and then with the idea that the customer can control it. But I wonder, would you actually want to ever give the customer access to that? You know, that sort of thing. So it's yeah, DMN is, I think, would be my vote.
I agree. Yeah, I love DMNs. And Ryan Faust, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Camunda doesn't charge extra for DMNs. However, I know that the Enterprise Edition, if you want to be able to modify the DMN in production, that's part of the Enterprise feature, but DMNs are part of the open source solution, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So there are a few features within Cockpit that are Enterprise only. You just mentioned one of them. That would be the live editing of DMN, right? Which is, I would think, that's kind of a stopgap measure, honestly, like a administrator operation that could be done in Cockpit. But to use DMN at large, right, it's totally part of the community offering. In fact, the decision engine runs right alongside the process engine. So
Awesome.
yeah, we certainly have access to model DMN, and we're making improvements with the modeling of DMN in our Camunda modeling tool.
Cool. Yeah, okay, that makes more sense. And Dave, the DMN, what you can do in DMNs is insane. So like my simple example here is using, you know, an output of a string, input of double. You can do objects, you can do, you know, you can have one DMN feed directly into another DMN as far as complex decision matrices go. And I also know Camunda does a full training on DMN specifically, which is something that I'm extremely interested in.
Cool. Yeah, I'm excited to dive into it. It looks really neat. Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Hi, this is Matthew speaking. I can only say go for DMN. Because it's really an advantage. We have done it not specific with Camunda, but with several clients already, and we see adoption rate is going up because they want to extract all logical reasoning out of the code. Not all, everything, sorry, more like decision making. So the rules, and it's really valuable. So just +1 for that.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for your input. I agree fully. Yeah, the other benefit, and something I don't have in my demo, the purchase rec process and the Angular application itself doesn't go all the way to where the DMN is analyzed. But when you do have a process that goes through all the way, you can look and see exactly how the DMN chose its value, which to me is extremely valuable in terms of just transparency. You know, a lot of the things that you try to do with BPM is to have transparency in your company, or to certain processes, you know, or break down silo walls and things like that. So having the ability to have transparency in your decision matrix, to me, is also really valuable. So it looks like we've got DMNs would be something that people would like to see in another demo. Any other topics that you guys would be interested in? I know Bastian, you're in the pot for document or ECM, having the one-stop shop for document storage.
Yeah, absolutely. Were you asking another question for me? Sorry, Sam.
No, I was just calling you out on your document storage wants and needs.
Yeah, we've spoken about that previously. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, this is Matthew again. Maybe it would be nice to actually show a bit more about when you change something. So we have version 1 of the process, including some screens, and then you move to a new version in new release. But actually, what I already asked a question about, how do you keep it in sync? Maybe you change some, how you say it, some screen items, like the quantity is moved out of the screen, but it's still in the process. So how do you keep track of that during development and also during releasing? That you make sure the quality of your product is still the same.
Right. I can
specific question, but
absolutely, I can answer that verbally. As far as going from one process version to another process version, you can either have the process run the life on the old version, or you can migrate them to the newer version. And I think, Ryan, is the migration, is that an enterprise feature, or is that?
So migration is possible using the REST APIs in the community edition, but one of the enterprise features of Cockpit would be the migration wizard, I guess, so to speak. So it helps you build the migration plan. Ultimately, once you're still using the REST API under the covers, and so yeah, it's kind of a WYSIWYG setup to map, analogous workflow steps from the previous version to the newest version. You can migrate backwards as well. But the engine itself has no issue with running multiple versions of the same process. And like you said, Sam, your two choices are really, let them gracefully expire in the old version, or migrate them to the newest version.
Yeah, I was. Thank you for your answer. I was specifically referring to the Angular screens you make in relation to the process models. I think I've seen in the past this the versioning is a big problem, because they add some elements in the screen, and then at some point the process model didn't match anymore.
Gotcha. No, that makes sense. Absolutely.
Very specific maybe, but I think very, especially when you have like multiple screens, multiple people working on multiple teams working on the same project.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I could see that totally being handled. Web services themselves, to get specific versions and not, I would probably have to modify the way that I'm doing my forms currently to include the version of the process that they're with. Because as it is right now, the form itself, or the external form, I'm putting directly in Camunda Modeler itself to tell it what it is, but I could just as easily put a form key with a version number on the end of it, and that would tell me exactly which HTML form to grab. But that's a very good point. Yeah, no, that'd be awesome to put that in a demo. Thank you, Matthew. All right, so we've got Aaron. I don't know if you want to kind of take the last little bit here. We've got about 6 minutes or so.
Yeah, well, I can certainly do that. Thank you for everyone for coming. This is a great discussion. We're actually going to be doing more of these types of meetups in the Camunda SF Bay Area user group, and that'll be coming in next year. Not sure when yet, but plans are in the works for having something in Q1 of next year. And we're getting your feedback here is great, because we'll know kind of what else we should focus on for that conversation. If you want more information about that user group, or have any other questions, please feel free to contact either Sam or myself. And we'll be, I believe Neil will be distributing the recording for this session, as well as this this presentation.
Hey, Aaron, this is Bastian. So if I'm interested in trying to look at a topic like we mentioned, like document storage, right? How we integrate into various document storage sort of applications. How do we go about reaching out to you guys to discuss that? Is that just through the emails that you guys have below?
It'd be a great way to start. Yeah.
Okay. Because there are so many elements of BPM that we can discuss here. Integration into different data structures. Reporting, like you mentioned, Tableau and all those others that people are obviously leveraging, and how we would leverage those using Camunda. So these are the type of topics, like I'm more business oriented than technically oriented, but that's this type of stuff that I would love to see, is that, well, how do we integrate into Tableau? How do we create the reporting as well as the dashboards that you need to run a BPM?
Yeah, absolutely. That's on the radar as well, and we definitely want to have a more business-oriented presentation sometime next year. Just don't know when that is yet. So, again, anyone has any suggestions for what Bastian was just talking about, or anything that they'd like to see in particular, just let Sam and I know, and we'll definitely keep track of that. And hopefully, we'll get to one of your topics of interest here with some Camunda or specific examples, real-world examples, in attendance at that meeting.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Great. All right, everyone. Are there any final thoughts or questions? If not,
just say again from Camunda, thank you very much for having me, and make sure that you guys continue to reach out for us to us for the future sessions. I could see maybe one of my colleagues attending your DMN-centric presentation, for example. So we love to participate, and we appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. Look forward to doing that through the Camunda user group, and we'll definitely be in touch. Thank you for attending today, Ryan.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye now.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.